The auction house occupies a converted 19th century bank in London's Mayfair district, a temple of commerce reinvented as a temple of art, where fortunes change hands beneath coffered ceilings and the watchful eyes of old masters. Tonight, the Grand Hall has been transformed into a private viewing salon for what Christie's is calling the Volkansky Collection, Lost Treasures of Imperial Russia. The estimated value of the 23 pieces on offer exceeds £400 million. The champagne is Dom Pérignon. The security is invisible but omnipresent. The guests are the kind of people who measure wealth not in millions but in influence. Natasha Ostrova moves through this world carrying a silver tray, her presence as unremarkable as the wallpaper. She is 28 years old, with cheekbones that speak of Slavic ancestry and eyes the color of winter twilight over the Neva River. Her English, when she speaks, carries the faintest trace of an accent that most listeners cannot place, something Eastern European, perhaps, or maybe just the careful pronunciation of someone for whom English is a second language learned late. The guests who notice her at all see only a pretty waitress, efficient and forgettable, another piece of the evening's carefully curated atmosphere. They do not know that Natasha Alexeyevna Ostrova holds a doctorate in art provenance and authentication from the Courtauld Institute, with a specialization in Russian and Soviet-era works. They do not know that her dissertation, Linguistic Markers of Forgery in Soviet Cultural Documentation, 1917-1991, remains the definitive academic work on detecting falsified provenance records for Russian art. They do not know that before her life collapsed, she was the youngest senior analyst ever appointed to the Art Loss Register's Russian desk, responsible for authenticating works valued in the hundreds of millions. They see a waitress. They see nothing. Natasha's expertise was born of heritage as much as education. Her grandmother, Yelena Mikhailovna, was a curator at the Hermitage during the siege of Leningrad, one of the women who risked their lives to protect Russia's cultural treasures from Nazi bombs and Soviet bureaucrats alike. Her mother, Irina, continued the family tradition as a restorer of icons, her hands bringing medieval saints back to life in a cramped Moscow apartment that smelled of linseed oil and turpentine. Natasha grew up surrounded by art, by history, by the understanding that beauty could be both priceless and fragile. She came to London on a fellowship, fell in love with a city that valued expertise, and built a career that seemed destined for greatness. The Art Loss Register, Christie's consulting contracts, private authentication work for collectors whose names appeared in Forbes and Tatler. By 26, she was earning more in a month than her mother had earned in a decade, and she was sending half of it home to Moscow, to the apartment where her mother still restored icons and her grandmother still remembered the siege. Then the sanctions came. Not personal sanctions. Natasha had no connection to oligarchs or the Kremlin, but the broader kind, the kind that made being Russian in London suddenly complicated. Her consulting contracts evaporated. Clients who had praised her expertise began finding reasons to work with less politically sensitive analysts. The Art Loss Register, facing pressure from donors, quietly declined to renew her position. She was not fired. She was simply no longer retained. The money stopped. The bills did not. Her grandmother's health deteriorated. A stroke, then another, then the slow fade of a mind that had once catalogued the entire collection of the Hermitage from memory. The care facility in Moscow cost more than Natasha could earn from the sporadic freelance work that trickled in. She took out loans. She sold her jewelry, her books, her collection of minor Russian prints that she had spent years assembling. She took a job at a catering company because it paid cash and asked no questions. The irony was not lost on her. She had built her career on exposing frauds perpetrated by wealthy men who believed their money placed them above accountability. Now she served those same men, carrying their drinks and clearing their plates, invisible in her black uniform, while they discussed deals worth more than she would earn in a lifetime. She had become background noise in the very world she once helped police. Her colleagues at the catering company knew nothing of her past. To them, she was simply Natasha, quiet, reliable, good with languages when foreign guests needed directions to the restroom. She never corrected them. She never mentioned the doctorate, the publications, the authentication work that had once placed her at the center of the international art market. Some wounds heal better in darkness. Now she serves champagne to people who once hired her for her expertise, and she pretends not to recognize them when they look through her as though she does not exist. Tonight is different. Tonight, for the first time in 18 months, Natasha feels the old electricity, the hunter's instinct that once made her the best in her field. Because tonight's auction features works from the Volkansky collection, and Natasha knows something about the Volkansky collection that no one else in this room has noticed. She has seen the provenance documents. She has read the authentication reports. And something is very, very wrong. The guests arrive in the particular order that wealth dictates, the merely rich first, establishing their presence before the truly powerful make their entrances. Natasha circulates with her tray, cataloging faces with the automatic precision of long training. There, Sir Geoffrey Ashworth, chairman of the Ashworth Foundation and one of Britain's foremost collectors of Russian art. His collection rivals the Hermitage in certain categories, has spent 40 years and hundreds of millions assembling it. His reputation for authenticity is absolute. He has never, in 4 decades of collecting, purchased a forgery. There, Marguerite Delacroix, director of acquisitions for the Louvre's Russian collection. She flew in from Paris this morning and will fly back tonight, regardless of the auction's outcome. Her presence is a signal. The French government is interested in acquiring certain pieces, should they prove genuine. There, a delegation from the National Museum of China, speaking quietly among themselves in Mandarin, their interest focused on 2 Fabergé pieces that allegedly once belonged to the last Romanov empress. The geopolitical implications of Chinese acquisition of Russian imperial treasures are not lost on anyone in the room. And then, commanding attention simply by existing, Konstantin Arkadyevich Morozov enters the hall. 54 years old. Net worth, approximately $19 billion, earned through the chaos of post-Soviet privatization and expanded through energy, metals, and strategic acquisitions across 3 continents. He left Russia before the latest round of sanctions, relocating to London with the ease of a man for whom borders are administrative inconveniences. His mansion in Kensington is larger than most museums. His yacht is named Tsarina. His reputation is built on ruthlessness, on deals that leave counterparties wondering how they lost everything while signing documents that seemed advantageous. More importantly for tonight, Konstantin Morozov is the seller of the Volkansky collection. He claims to have acquired it through a complex series of estate transactions, tracing back to a distant branch of the Volkansky family who fled Russia after the revolution. The provenance documentation is extensive. Hundreds of pages of Soviet-era inventories, export permits, customs declarations, and private correspondence, all meticulously assembled to prove an unbroken chain of ownership from 1917 to the present day. Natasha has seen those documents. She obtained copies through a contact at Christie's who owed her a favor, a small breach of protocol that she justified as professional curiosity. What she found in those pages made her blood run cold. Morozov enters with an entourage of 5, lawyers, art advisors, and a stunning woman in her 30s who seems decorative rather than functional. He is speaking Russian with his senior advisor, a thin man with the precise diction of old Moscow intelligentsia, and Natasha, passing with her champagne tray, catches every word. Morozov, in Russian. Ashworth is the key. If he bids, the others will follow. The Chinese are here for the Fabergé, but Ashworth sets the tone for everything else. Advisor, in Russian. He's examined the provenance thoroughly. His people found nothing concerning. Morozov, in Russian, smiling. Of course they found nothing. Petrov's work is impeccable. Even the Hermitage experts couldn't tell the difference. By this time tomorrow, we will have 400 million pounds, and these fools will have very expensive forgeries. Natasha's hand trembles slightly on the tray. Petrov, she knows that name. Dmitry Petrov, the most notorious forger of Russian documentation in the black market, a man whose work has fooled auction houses, museums, and government agencies for 30 years. She wrote a chapter about him in her dissertation. She thought she recognized his methodology in the Volkonsky provenance documents, but she dismissed it as paranoia, as wishful thinking, as the desperate grasping of an exile who wanted to matter again. She was not paranoid. She was right. Morozov notices her standing nearby, notices her the way one notices furniture that has been placed inconveniently. He switches to English, his accent thick but comprehensible. Morozov. You, girl, more champagne here. Natasha approaches, eyes down, movements deferential. She begins pouring, careful to remain invisible, but Morozov's advisor is studying her with sudden interest. Advisor, in Russian, to Morozov. She looks Russian, the bone structure. Morozov, in Russian, dismissive. Half the waitresses in London look Russian. It's the only work they can get since the sanctions. Poor creatures, reduced to serving their betters and pretending they don't understand when we call them what they are. He laughs. The advisor laughs. Natasha continues pouring, her face expressionless, though inside, something cold and sharp is crystallizing. Morozov, in Russian, looking directly at Natasha. Look at her, pretty enough, I suppose, in a peasant way, but empty behind the eyes. These women, they come to the West thinking they'll find opportunity, and instead they find trays and aprons. At least in Russia, they knew their place. Natasha's hands remain steady. Her expression remains blank. But she meets Morozov's eyes for just a fraction of a second, long enough to register, not long enough to challenge. And in that instant, something passes between them. He sees a flash of something unexpected, intelligence perhaps, or recognition, and his smile falters momentarily before he dismisses whatever he glimpsed. Morozov, in English. That's enough. Go away. Natasha withdraws, her heart pounding but her movements serene. She has 23 pieces of artwork to examine. She has perhaps 2 hours before the bidding begins. She has a decision to make: remain invisible and watch 400 million pounds flow into the pockets of a man who just called her a peasant, or become visible in a way that will change everything. She thinks of her grandmother, who hid masterpieces in the basements of Leningrad while Nazi shells fell. She thinks of her mother, who restored icons with hands that never stopped shaking after her husband's death. She thinks of every woman in her family who protected beauty and truth when powerful men tried to destroy it. She begins to move through the gallery, examining the artworks with eyes that see what no one else in this room can see. The Volkonsky collection is displayed across 3 interconnected galleries, each piece illuminated with museum-quality lighting and accompanied by detailed placard descriptions and provenance summaries. The guests move among them like pilgrims visiting relics, reverent, acquisitive, calculating the distance between desire and affordability. Natasha moves among them too, but her eyes are not on the art. They are on the documentation displayed beside each piece, high-resolution reproductions of the provenance records, offered as evidence of authenticity. To most viewers, these documents are incomprehensible artifacts, their Cyrillic script and Soviet bureaucratic formatting as opaque as hieroglyphics. To Natasha, they are as readable as the morning newspaper and far more revealing. She pauses beside a small Kandinsky watercolor, an early work allegedly created during the artist's Munich period and brought out of Russia by the Volkonsky family in 1918. The estimated value is £12 million. The provenance documentation includes a 1923 Soviet export permit, a 1947 French customs declaration, and a series of private sale receipts spanning 50 years. Natasha studies the export permit. Her trained eye moves across the document, parsing typography, paper grain, ink density, and most importantly, language. The permit is dated August 1923 and originates from the People's Commissariat for Education, Narkompros, which controlled cultural exports during that period. The bureaucratic Russian is dense and formal, exactly what one would expect from early Soviet documentation. Except, the document uses the word produktsiya to describe the artwork, a term that means production or output in industrial contexts. In 1923, Soviet cultural bureaucrats consistently used произведение искусства, work of art, in export documentation. The shift to industrial terminology didn't occur until the late 1920s, when Stalin's cultural policies began treating art as another form of production rather than creative expression. It is a subtle error, nearly invisible to anyone who hasn't spent years studying the evolution of Soviet bureaucratic language. Natasha's heart rate increases. She moves to the next piece, a Chagall gouache, allegedly removed from Moscow in 1921. The provenance includes a handwritten letter from a Soviet museum official authorizing the transfer. The handwriting is period appropriate, the paper stock is correct, but the letter contains a reference to the State Tretyakov Gallery. In 1921, the institution was still called the Tretyakov Municipal Gallery. It wasn't nationalized and renamed until 1918, but the state prefix wasn't consistently used in internal documents until 1924. Another anachronism, another impossible error, another fingerprint of Dmitry Petrov's methodology. The forger was meticulous about physical authenticity, but occasionally careless about linguistic evolution, assuming that readers would not know the difference between the language of 1921 and 1924. Natasha moves faster now, her server's tray forgotten on a side table, her eyes scanning document after document. A 1938 inventory list that uses post-war abbreviations. A 1945 restitution claim that references a department that wasn't created until 1952. A 1967 private sale agreement that employs terminology from the perestroika era, decades too early. The entire collection is compromised. Every piece. £400 million worth of forgeries, supported by documentation that would fool any expert who didn't have Natasha's specific training in Soviet linguistic evolution. Morozov wasn't exaggerating when he said Petrov's work was impeccable. The physical documents are masterpieces of deception. Only the language betrays them, and only to someone who knows exactly what to look for. She thinks of her dissertation defense, when her committee questioned whether linguistic analysis alone could reliably detect forgeries. She had spent 3 hours demonstrating her methodology, walking them through case after case where physical authentication had failed, but linguistic markers had revealed the truth. Languages evolve in ways that forgers cannot replicate without living through the evolution. Bureaucratic terminology reflects political shifts that happen gradually, almost imperceptibly, but leave permanent traces in official documents. A forger can age paper and fade ink, but they cannot unlearn the vocabulary of their own era. Tonight, she is watching her dissertation come to life in real time. Every theory she proposed, every methodology she developed, every argument she made about the reliability of linguistic analysis, all of it is being validated by the forged documents displayed around this room. She was right. She was always right. And now, perhaps, she will have the chance to prove it. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth stands before the collection's centerpiece. a large oil painting attributed to Ilya Repin, showing a scene from Russian peasant life. The estimated value is £65 million. If authentic, it would be one of the most significant Repin works to appear on the market in decades. Ashworth is studying it with the focused intensity of a man preparing to spend a substantial portion of his fortune. Natasha approaches him. She has perhaps 30 minutes before the auction begins. 30 minutes to decide whether to stay silent and watch a decent man, a man who has spent his life building a collection of genuine beauty, become the victim of the most sophisticated art fraud she has ever encountered. She thinks of Morozov's words, empty behind the eyes. These women knew their place. She thinks of her grandmother, who knew her place too, standing guard over beauty while the world burned around her. She thinks of what it means to know your place and choose to step outside it. Anyway, she opens her mouth to speak, and Morozov appears at her elbow, his hand gripping her arm with sudden force. Morozov, in Russian, low and dangerous. I saw you looking at the documents. I saw your face change. You understand, don't you? You understand everything. His grip tightens. His smile remains fixed, for the benefit of anyone watching, but his eyes are the eyes of a predator who has spotted unexpected prey. Morozov, in Russian. Who are you? Who sent you? This is the moment where Natasha could deny everything, play the confused waitress, retreat into invisibility, and let £400 million of fraud proceed unchallenged. The moment where safety and silence would be the same choice. She chooses differently. Natasha, in Russian, her accent shifting to perfect educated Moscow. No one sent me, Konstantin Arkadyevich. I came because I needed work, and your catering company pays cash. I stayed because I recognized Dmitry Petrov's methodology in your provenance documentation, and I wanted to be certain before I made accusations. Morozov's face goes pale. The shift in her Russian, from invisible servant to educated equal, is as shocking as if she had removed a mask. His grip on her arm loosens involuntarily. Morozov, in Russian, barely above a whisper. Who are you? Natasha, in Russian. I am the woman you called a peasant, the one with empty eyes, the one who knows her place. My name is Natasha Ostrova. I hold a doctorate in art provenance from the court old, and I wrote my dissertation on detecting Soviet document forgeries. You are standing in a room full of people who are about to spend £400 million on artwork with fabricated provenance, and I am the only person who can prove it. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth has noticed the confrontation. He approaches, his expression curious but cautious. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth. Is there a problem here? Morozov, switching to English, forced calm. No problem, Sir Geoffrey. A minor misunderstanding with the staff. I apologize for the disturbance. Natasha, in English, clear and professional. Actually, Sir Geoffrey, there is a significant problem. The provenance documentation for this collection contains linguistic anachronisms consistent with forgery. I believe every piece in tonight's auction is falsely attributed, supported by fabricated Soviet-era documents created by Dmitry Petrov. The words fall into the gallery like stones into still water. Ripples of reaction spread outward, gasps, whispers, the sudden attention of everyone within earshot. Marguerite Delacroix moves closer. The Chinese delegation pauses mid-conversation. Christie's representatives exchange alarmed glances. Morozov, laughing, but the laugh is strained. This is absurd. She's a waitress, a serving girl. She knows nothing about art authentication. Natasha, cutting him off. The 1923 export permit for the Kandinsky uses the word produkcja to describe the artwork. Soviet cultural. Bureaucrats didn't adopt that industrial terminology until the late 1920s. In 1923, they would have written Произведение искусства. It's an impossible anachronism, one that proves the document was created by someone who knew the Soviet period generally, but not the specific linguistic evolution of the Narkompros bureaucracy. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth's expression has shifted from curiosity to intense focus. He is a collector who has spent 40 years avoiding forgeries. He knows the importance of provenance. He knows the damage a single mistake can do to a reputation. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth. Go on, Natasha. The Chagall provenance includes a letter referencing the State Tretyakov Gallery in 1921. The institution wasn't consistently called that in internal documents until 1924. The 1938 inventory list uses abbreviations that weren't standardized until after World War II. The 1967 sale agreement contains perestroika-era terminology, decades before perestroika existed. Every document in this collection contains similar errors, invisible to anyone who hasn't studied the specific evolution of Soviet bureaucratic language. Morozov, to Ashworth, desperate now. Sir Geoffrey, this woman is clearly disturbed. She's invented credentials to Marguerite Delacroix, stepping forward, her French accent crisp. Natasha Ostrova. I thought I recognized you. We consulted on the other Morozov, collection authentication 3 years ago. Before the circumstances changed. She turns to Sir Geoffrey with the authority of the Louvre behind her words. Marguerite Delacroix. Dr. Ostrova was the leading expert on Soviet provenance documentation in Europe. Her dissertation is still the standard reference text for detecting Russian art forgeries. If she says there are linguistic anachronisms, I would stake the Louvre's reputation that she is correct. The room has gone completely silent. Morozov's face is the color of old paper. His advisor has begun edging toward the exit. The Christie's representatives are already on their phones, speaking in urgent whispers. Natasha, to Ashworth. I can walk you through every document in this collection and identify the specific anachronisms that prove forgery. I can explain the methodology of Dmitry Petrov and show you where his characteristic errors appear. I can provide you with the academic framework to verify everything I'm saying through independent analysis. What I cannot do is stand silent while 400 million pounds changes hands based on lies. She turns to face Morozov directly, and when she speaks, her voice carries the weight of her grandmother's courage and her mother's precision. Natasha, in Russian. You asked who I am. I am the daughter of women who protected Russian art when men like you tried to steal it. I am the scholar you dismissed as a peasant because I was carrying a tray. I am the expert whose career you and your kind destroyed because my passport said Russian at an inconvenient time. And I am the person who just ended your 400 million pound fraud with the education you assumed I was too stupid to have. She pauses, then adds in English, ensuring everyone understands. Natasha. You said I knew my place. You were right. My place is here, exposing men who think their wealth makes them immune to consequences. My place is protecting the people you intended to defraud. My place is making sure that the art my grandmother nearly died to preserve is never again used as a vehicle for theft and lies. The collapse is swift and absolute. Within 15 minutes, Christie's has officially suspended the auction pending independent verification of all provenance documentation. Within 30 minutes, the Metropolitan Police's Art and Antiques Unit has been contacted, and officers are en route to secure the collection as potential evidence of fraud. Within an hour, Konstantin Morozov's lawyers are advising him to say nothing further and to prepare for a very long and very expensive legal battle. The guests who arrived expecting to acquire treasures now cluster in small groups, their conversations a mixture of outrage and relief. Outrage at the attempted deception. Relief that someone, somehow, caught it before they committed their millions to worthless canvas and fraudulent paper. Morozov, to his lawyers, barely containing his fury. This is a setup. She was planted. Someone sent her to destroy this sale. Morozov's lawyer, grimly. Konstantin, she's a former art loss register analyst with a doctorate from the Cordald and published expertise in exactly the type of forgery she identified. Her presence here was coincidence. Your decision to insult her in Russian, assuming she couldn't understand, was unfortunate. Morozov, in Russian. Unfortunate? Unfortunate. She's destroyed everything. Morozov's lawyer, switching to Russian, low and urgent. She's destroyed nothing that wasn't already based on fraud. What's destroyed is our ability to claim ignorance. You discussed Petrov by name. You acknowledged the forgeries, in Russian, thinking no one could hear. But she heard everything, Konstantin, everything. Morozov sinks into a chair, his face gray, his hands trembling. The man who walked into this room believing himself untouchable, believing that his wealth and his language and his contempt for the help made him safe, now faces the ruin of his reputation and possibly his freedom. The police arrive 20 minutes later. They are polite, professional, and utterly thorough. The collection is secured as evidence. The provenance documents are photographed and catalogued. Morozov's lawyers request immediate consultation, which is granted but observed. The investigation will be long, complex, and international in scope. Petrov operates from somewhere in Eastern Europe, and the forgeries have been circulating through legitimate channels for years. But tonight's auction is finished. Tonight's fraud is exposed. And tonight, every collector in the room has been spared the humiliation and financial devastation of purchasing artwork that would eventually be proven worthless. Natasha watches from across the room. She feels no satisfaction in his destruction, only the hollow relief of having done what was necessary. The art world is small and interconnected. Morozov has allies, resources, lawyers who specialize in making problems disappear. She has made a powerful enemy tonight, but she has also remembered who she is, and that, she realizes, is worth any price. The woman who entered this room carrying a tray is not the woman who will leave it. Something has been restored tonight. Not just her reputation, not just her career, but her sense of herself as someone who matters, whose expertise has value, whose voice deserves to be heard. An hour later, the gallery has largely emptied. The police have completed their preliminary documentation. The Christie's staff are engaged in damage control, managing press inquiries and calming anxious collectors. Natasha sits alone on a bench in the corner of the main gallery, her catering uniform suddenly absurd, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the adrenaline is fading. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth approaches. He moves slowly, deliberately, the way a man moves when he is reconsidering everything he thought he knew. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth. May I sit? Natasha gestures to the space beside her. He sits, his posture formal, but his expression open. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth. I was going to bid £65 million on that Repin. I spent 6 months researching the collection. I hired 3 separate authentication consultants. None of them caught what you caught in an hour of serving champagne. Natasha. Your consultants were looking at the art and the physical documents. I was listening to the language. Petrov is brilliant with materials, paper, ink, typefaces, but he learned his Russian from textbooks and archives. He doesn't hear the difference between 1923 and 1927 the way someone who grew up with the language does, the way someone who studied the language's evolution across political regimes does. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth. Madame Delacroix tells me you were the best in the field. She says your career was destroyed by politics, not incompetence. Natasha, with a small, bitter smile. Being Russian became inconvenient. Clients didn't want to explain my involvement to their boards. The institutions didn't want to defend my security clearances. It was easier to simply let me go. Sir R. Jeffrey Ashworth. And so the finest expert on Soviet provenance in Europe was reduced to serving canapés to men who couldn't recognize a forged export permit if it was printed on their dinner napkins. Natasha, I needed to pay my grandmother's medical bills. The catering company didn't care about my nationality. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. Your grandmother, she was at the Hermitage during the siege? Natasha. She helped move the collection into the basement, shelters. She cataloged pieces by candlelight while the Germans shelled the city. She protected Russian art with her body when there was nothing else between the masterpieces and destruction. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. And tonight, her granddaughter protected collectors from destruction with nothing but her expertise and her courage. The family resemblance is striking. He reaches into his jacket pocket and produces a card, heavy stock, embossed with the crest of the Ashworth Foundation. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. The foundation maintains a permanent staff of authentication consultants. We advise museums, private collectors, auction houses, and governments on Russian and Eastern European art. It is, I'm embarrassed to admit, a department that apparently lacks anyone with your specific expertise in Soviet linguistic analysis. Natasha stares at the card. The words on it blur slightly. Exhaustion or emotion or both. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. I want you to lead a new division within the Foundation, Soviet and Russian provenance authentication. Your mandate would be to develop protocols for detecting exactly the kind of fraud you exposed tonight, to train other analysts, to build databases of linguistic markers, to ensure that collectors like me never again come within minutes of spending £65 million on worthless canvas. Natasha, barely above a whisper. Sir Jeffrey, I don't know what to say. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. Say you'll consider it. The position pays £200,000 annually, with performance bonuses tied to successful fraud prevention. The foundation will also establish a care trust for your grandmother. Consider it an investment in your peace of mind. I cannot have my head of Russian authentication distracted by financial anxieties. Natasha's hands are shaking again, but not from exhaustion. The number he has named is more than she earned in 3 years at the art loss register. It is freedom. It is security. It is the life she was supposed to have before sanctions and politics and prejudice stripped it away. She thinks of her grandmother, confused now but once so sharp, who would sometimes, in her lucid moments, ask about Natasha's work at the art loss register. She never had the heart to tell her the truth. That the career her grandmother was so proud of had evaporated, that the granddaughter she raised to protect beauty was now carrying trays for men who saw her as furniture. Now she will have something real to tell her, something that would make sense to a woman who spent her youth protecting the Hermitage, something that continues the family legacy of standing between art and those who would desecrate it. Natasha. I have conditions. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth, a slight smile. I would expect nothing less from someone who just faced down a billionaire in his own language. Natasha. Full independence in my authentication decisions. No pressure from donors or board members to approve works that don't meet my standards. If I say something is forged, it doesn't sell, regardless of whose collection it comes from or how much money is involved. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. The Foundation's reputation rests on integrity. Your independence is not a concession. It's a requirement. What else? Natasha. A scholarship fund, named for my grandmother, Yelena Mikhailovna Ostrova. Full support for students from Russia and Eastern Europe, pursuing advanced studies in art history, authentication, and cultural preservation. The students whose careers might otherwise be destroyed by politics they didn't create and circumstances they can't control. Sir Jeffrey Ashworth. The Yelena Mikhailovna Ostrova. Scholarship for Cultural Preservation. The foundation will endow it with £3 million, supporting 5 full scholarships annually in perpetuity. Your grandmother protected art through war. Her name will now protect the scholars who continue that mission. Natasha closes her eyes. She thinks of her grandmother in the basements of the Hermitage, cataloging beauty by candlelight while the world burned. She thinks of her mother's hands, bringing saints back to life one brushstroke at a time. She thinks of the chain of women who preserved culture against destruction and the scholarship that will extend that chain into futures she will never see. Natasha. One more thing, Sir Geoffrey Ashworth. Name it, Natasha. I want Konstantin Morozov to know that the woman he called a peasant, the one with empty eyes who knew her place, is now the person who will ensure he never sells another forged artwork as long as he lives. I want him to understand that every deal he attempts will be scrutinized by someone who heard every word he said tonight and remembers every insult he spoke. Sir Geoffrey Ashworth, extending his hand. Dr. Ostrova, I believe we are going to accomplish remarkable things together. And yes, Mr. Morozov will learn precisely who dismantled his empire of forgeries, in the language he thought no one else in the room could understand. Natasha takes his hand. Her grip is firm. Her eyes are clear. She is no longer the invisible woman in the catering uniform, bearing trays and insults in equal measure. She is Dr. Natasha Ostrova, Court-all doctorate, Art Loss Register veteran, head of Soviet and Russian provenance authentication for the Ashworth Foundation. She is the granddaughter of a woman who protected masterpieces through siege and starvation, the daughter of a woman who restored icons with hands that never stopped shaking, the heir to a legacy of preservation that spans generations and borders and wars. Tomorrow she will call her grandmother in Moscow. She will speak slowly, waiting for the fog to clear, and when it does, if it does, she will tell her about tonight, about the forgeries detected, about the fraud prevented, about the scholarship that will carry her name into futures none of them will live to see. She does not know if her grandmother will understand. She hopes, at least, that somewhere in the depths of that fading mind, the woman who hid Rembrandts from Nazi bombs will recognize that her granddaughter has continued the work. And she is the woman who just taught a billionaire that the most dangerous person in any room is the one he assumes cannot understand a word he says.